Today's date is May 25th, 2016. My name is Leah Michelle Cash, and I'm interviewing Dr. Joseph Bailey for the Archiving Black History in the Inland Empire project. His name is spelled
Josephbailey the second.
Thank you, Dr. Bailey. So we are interviewing here in the home of Ratibu and Wilma Amina Carter in the city of Rialto, California. Thank you, Dr. Bailey, for taking the time out to conduct this interview with us. So my first questions for you are going to be, tell us a little bit about the beginning of your life in your childhood.
I was born in Pine Bluff, Arkansas. My dad was dean of the school there, and at age 3 months, age 3 years, we moved to Minnesota. And this was during the middle of the Depression, and I had an opportunity to learn about sacrifice. The only way that we could really live was to go fishing, and Michigan was the land of 10,000 lakes, and so I ate a lot of fish. And there were no black people there, but I was sitting on my back porch counting my marbles, since I was a champion marble shooter.
Wow.
When the whole idea came on me to plan out my life. At that point, I had 5 goals, and then another one was off to the side, and that said, help bright black boys. The remarkable thing about that is I was not around any black people. I was the leader of 2 gangs, one Norwegian and one Swede, and both of them would come to my door every day wanting me to be their leader. And I was good because I knew how to steal rhubarb. I knew I could negotiate that.
What is rhubarb?
It's a bitter celery kind of like thing, but it's really good. I was living with a black family, and the fellow told me that since we were going to go south, white people didn't like black people, and so I better be strong, get strong in order to be able to defend myself. And so at 5 years old, I was lifting weights and all this kind of thing every morning. But there were a lot of wonderful experiences there. The school system was superb, and it's the best school system I ever saw. When I came to Wilson, North Carolina, it was an all-black community, and
How old were you then?
I had started the first grade in Minnesota and finished the last half of the first grade in Wilson. The first day I was there, 2 black girls came up to me and said, "You think you're better than me?" And I couldn't imagine what that was about, because I had never seen or heard anything like that. But over the years I have understood it. What I really realized at that time was that that everybody is born a genius, and that means you're born with selfhood greatness. My mother would tell me that I had selfhood greatness. Not that I was better than anybody, but just as from having a spark of God within me gave me all the power and knowledge that I needed. But what I noticed was that the black classmates had that beaten out of them by racism. And this was a time when lynchings were all around Wilson. Almost daily, some black person was getting lynched. But the black community itself was just wonderful. I have never been around people so great as that. There was no homelessness. There was nobody in need of food. There was anybody that was sick. There were always people there to take care of them. We never locked our doors. And everybody was promoting every youth to first have manners, and then to be successful for your race. That's what I heard every day. They didn't ask me if I was going to college. They said, "What college are you going to?" And these are the kinds of spurs that I had which geared my life. And then I stayed in Wilson with Mama Clara and Aunt Julia and Aunt Cherry, and there I had an opportunity to see what unconditional love is in action. One would get ready to stand up to go get something, and somebody else would say, "Sit down, I'll get it for you." Everybody took care of everybody. I mean, there was love, and nobody ever spanked me or scolded me or anything. But there was a lot of humor, and I really am attached to humor. Always have been. When I went to, 3 years later, when I moved to Greensboro, North Carolina, to join my mother, I became a paper boy immediately, and this was at age 7. And at no time did I not have less than 4 jobs, at no time, including
Wow.
morning and afternoon paper and cutting grass and doing jobs for neighbors and things like that. One of my assignments was gardening. And there I learned the fundamental principles of life and just how important nature is. This has been the seed for my philosophy, because later I learned that ancient Africans considered nature to be the home of God. And if you understand nature, and if you learn how to think in mathematical terms the way nature is laid out, then you stay on the right path to whatever you want to do, and you will succeed.
Because there's brilliance there
Absolutely.
in the design.
And you can see it.
You can
That's
see it.
the thing that I could see. The whole idea of planting a seed and watching the roots and the stem and the branches and the leaves and the fruit is a fundamental concept of mine today. Next question.
So, with all of that and being identified that there's greatness in you and something that you have lived with all of your life, what is it that planted that seed of greatness for you to become a doctor?
Well, the first thing I remember was that in school, kindergarten, if any child fell at noon in the yard, whereas the other kids would stand around and laugh, I would rush to see if I could help. That's when I knew that compassion was my trademark.
Mm-hmm.
And compassion is an aspect of unconditional love. And I got a chance to see what that was like, not only from living in Wilson, but as a newspaper boy, many of my customers were ex-slaves. And so I could talk with ex-slaves, and I saw a wonderfulness in them. We are born with two major faculties. One is a pre-birth emotion. That's not the same as acquired emotion. That's not the same as getting angry and getting upset and all this kind of thing. But a pre-birth emotion is what allows a baby to connect with the mother. And there's that love. It's about unconditional love. The other part that we're born with is intellect. And the whole idea is for intellect and your pre-birth emotions to act as partners. But the slaves didn't have a chance to develop their intellect. But what they did perfect was their pre-birth emotions, which is common sense. That is the true definition of common sense. Nothing else. If you come out of your own pre-birth emotions and learn to live with people and learn who to avoid, and it's a me-we concept. That means that whatever is about me, you are also included in that. We're not separate. We're connected.
We're connected.
And this was the theme of the all-black community that I grew up in, both in Wilson and Greensboro, North Carolina. When I saw the damage that had been done to black kids, but those same black kids had such brilliance. And I saw them drop out of school with all of that talent and unbelievable skills. It hurt me to my heart, and I vowed that when I could, I was going to be successful and come back and do whatever I could to help. That's where I am now.
And so, in the profession of medicine that you are in, what is that profession? And tell us a little bit about that profession.
It was natural that my compassion would lead me into medicine. And when I finished medical school and internship, it was a law called the Berry Plan that all medical graduates had to go into the military. Well, I went into the military.
What branch?
Air Force. And I was sent to the Philippines in charge of 10,000 troops. And instead of seeing 20 people a day as the requirement, I would see 80 because I enjoyed seeing people and helping them to get better. And then, since I was single, I would go and help the orthopedic surgeons with the wounded soldiers flown in from Vietnam, because Vietnam, Clark, where I was the first medical station for the wounded soldiers. So I got a chance to see all of these war wounds and from an orthopedic perspective. That caused me to want to go into orthopedics. But at that time, orthopedics was dominated by white Southerners, and they did not want any black people in orthopedics. And in fact, there were only 9 in the country, and only 1 was allowed to pass his boards.
Wow.
And
one African American?
Yeah. And so I made a vow to myself that I was going to be the second.
And Dr. Bailey, can you define orthopedics?
No. about the bones and muscles and joints and nerves and blood vessels,
Things
things
that
that go wrong, things that hurt.
that are in your body, and things where you would have to have a true measure of compassion
Yes,
in order to.
the good thing about it is my patients didn't die. That's- they were used. They didn't die, and I'd get mad if they did. I remember staying up 3 nights on one Air Force pilot that had crashed, and I was able to pull him out. I was able to pull him through. He was in very bad shape, and we got to be very close. And then he was sent back to San Francisco, and I called to check on him and found out that they had let him go down and he died, and that hurt me to my heart. But I also found in orthopedics that nothing that I could do that was commonplace would ever be accepted by white orthopedists. And so I chose to take a route that was less traveled.
Mm-hmm.
It was just as important, but there wasn't any attention on it. And this was in the realm of congenital bone defects. And to that end, I went to Johns Hopkins to take genetics.
I bet that was fascinating.
Completely, yes. And they told me not to go to Johns Hopkins because they were still fighting the Civil War. But I needed to know that. I mean, they were the best, and I had to go where I could get the best, even if it was a problem. And this is the way that I have always lived my life. I don't look at how difficult is it. I look at, do I need it? And the little people of America had their convention in Baltimore, and they all came to Johns Hopkins to be examined. Because I was an orthopedic surgeon, I was allowed to examine all of them. But the other fellows could only examine 6.
Mm-hmm.
But they weren't surgeons. They were in medicine. I could also read X-rays, and they couldn't.
Mm-hmm.
As a result, I was able to put together what nobody in the history of mankind was able to do, and that was to start unraveling the confusion about the syndromes and put them in order. In other words, at the time I started, there were 9 types of dwarfs known in the world. I had all of the world literature translated and found out that all of it was wrong. And so I would drive up to 500 miles to see one case, and I would go in the hospital, spend 4 days to get 3 cases, and after a while I accumulated all of this information and then start putting it in order, so that when I wrote my book, which is the classic text on the subject, I wrote on 116, whereas there had been 9 at the beginning.
Wow.
And
That's incredible.
And I also made a discovery that they said was the greatest discovery at Johns Hopkins that year, and that was the reason when they would put these dwarfs under anesthesia to do surgery, many of them would die immediately, and nobody knew why. But I discovered that it was because of the bone that the head spins on, the bone of the neck that the head spins on, was inadequate. Instead of being like that, it was maybe like that, so that when they put their head back, it just shut off all the
blood supply,
everything to the brain, and they would die immediately. But other people stole that. I won't go into that. but that was stolen. Also in the process, there were several things that I invented, and every one of them was stolen by other people. For example, there was a heel cord stretching brace, and I had a brace man make it, a brace company make it, and found out they had claimed it and published it. So that's the story of my life in medicine. All of my inventions and everything. And that used to hurt me very deeply until I realized the benefit of it. And ancient Africans have an expression that says, you are supposed to take your difficulties in life and use them to bring out the best in you. And that's the law of Harakudi, and that's a fundamental law of the way I live. So what I realized that even though I didn't get credit for these things that I did, the people benefited, and that was my purpose. That was a learning experience for me. I mean, it took me to another level, and I've had many opportunities to go higher levels.
To higher levels.
Yeah.
Well, being a genius, I would sure think that you have gone to many levels, because we're talking to somebody very brilliant here. And so with that, what brought you to California in the Inland Empire?
Well, in my orthopedic residency, they didn't want me there, and I integrated 8 places, and every one of them came this close and said, we don't want you here.
Think because of the color of your skin?
Yeah, yeah. And so I had made a vow that I wasn't going to let anybody stop me. And so this meant that things that I normally would have turned around and slugged somebody on, I just kept quiet. I just kept quiet and said nothing. And I was then accepted, asked to come to the University of Connecticut to be an assistant professor in orthopedic surgery, put in charge of the Veterans Hospital. And all the veterans in New England came through that hospital. So I had a chance to operate on all kinds of things. And war wounds, there's no duplicates. Every one of them is unique. And so I would travel down, I would go down to Yale to go to the anatomy lab down there and do operations on cadavers before I came back. And I had a lot of discoveries there. And then they had just opened up Martin Luther King Hospital in Los Angeles. And I was asked to come out and be chief of that. And so I came out, and the day that I got there, there was this committee of local orthopedists, black orthopedists, that says, we don't want an outsider, even though I was under signed contract. So I had to put they said, you can store your stuff, which I did, until I could find a place to stay and do something. I came back the next day, and all of my belongings had been stolen and wiped out, so I had nothing, which has happened a lot. I then got a job at a local clinic, and they gave me the opportunity to select my own orthotech. And so the day of the interview, there were 20 guys there, and one of them was black. All 19 of the white guys knew everything about about orthopedics and how to be an orthopedic tech. The black guy didn't know anything. He hadn't even been in the hospital, so I chose him. and, and I had to send him out to all the different clinics, the operating room, and everything like that. And I still had to do all my work myself. But he got so good that one of the orthopedists just took him as his partner and out, and he really had a lot of success as a result of that. But I didn't like what was going on. And so I decided to go into practice on my own. I came to San Bernardino because it was in range of the jazz station, the Los Angeles KABC, I think, and I couldn't live without the jazz station. I mean, that kept my sanity. You know, I don't know how people can live without jazz.
Say that again. You don't know how people could live without jazz.
Yeah, I mean the mid '50s, and I'm particular. I don't care about that on either side except the mid '50s. And so I went around to all the orthopedists to see if it was okay to come here. And they said, oh yeah, we need young blood and all this. So when I finally came, I was going to move into the new building, the St. Bernardines, and that made people mad. What are you mad about? You know, what are you mad about? They wanted me to move into some back alley place. I said, no, that's not
I don't think so.
That's not suited for me. And by that time they had told all of the community doctors not to refer the cases to me.
And that was year?
72.
1972.
Yeah. And it was so extensive that I couldn't even get employees. And the way I know that was that the ones that finally came told me that they were told that don't come to work for him. They wouldn't let me get on the emergency room staff.
So we could see that how horrible the racism was in 1972.
Oh, absolutely. And so I had rent to pay. So I went to Pasadena, and there was a sign, office for rent, and I went to the door, and they said, we don't want any colored people here. And I went to Long Beach to a clinic. They were advertising for another orthopedist, and they said, well, you'll have to get your own place. We'll refer you our Medi-Cal. I said, that didn't sound right to me either. So I came back here, and for survival purposes, I declared myself a world authority on the biggest problems that they had in orthopedics, which was workers that got injured but had a bony defect in their back. And because I had genetics, enabled me to make that claim. I hadn't ever seen anything like it. Never.
Ever.
Ever. And I also told the insurance companies, you see, at that time, the doctors wouldn't deal with insurance of any kind because they just thought it was immoral. I don't know where they get this whole concept of immoral. But I didn't have a choice. And so I went to the insurance companies and I told them that I would see their patients, which they had a hard time doing, and they told me they couldn't get reports back from a doctor maybe for 6 to 9 months. I told them I'll give it to you in 24 hours. From the time I see the patient, you'll have a report 24 hours later, which meant, therefore, that when they started sending patients, I would have to stay up all night. I was on about a half-hour night, a half-hour sleep a night schedule.
Because see, the one thing that they didn't bank on was your compassion, your love for seeing people, and
Yeah.
your love for helping people
Yeah.
who needed the help.
So the way that I would handle these tough cases, it was to the point that they named me an independent medical examiner for the state of California, because I could handle, because I was a world authority in bone defects. So this meant they sent the toughest cases, 5 attorneys on this side, 5 on this side, who all had an idea of what I was supposed to say, which was all different. So I had to learn to deal with them by not starting where they were. I would go back
Which is your
10,000
trademark.
years. I would go back 10,000 years.
Which is your trademark.
and then start building this case
And
on
your
from
gift.
throughout the ages. They couldn't do anything. I mean, they couldn't join in because they had no
Knowledge.
background. Yeah, and so it got so nobody could argue with me. and they used to draw me down for deposition and everything, the court and all of that. And after a while, they kind of stopped, and I asked somebody, "Why did that stop?" And they said, "Your word is like God."
Yeah, because the sincerity was there, the compassion was there,
And I wasn't
the
writing
patience
for
was
one side
there,
or the other.
and you
I just
weren't
called it just the
just-
way
it was.
And that's the way I was taught in my all-black community. Tell the truth. In fact, one of the statements an ex-slave made to me, they didn't talk much, but what they said was profound. For example, she said, "Always seek the truth and build all your decisions around it."
Yes.
Whoa, that I have lived by. And I don't care who it is. I mean, you're not going to buy me, And there were a lot of doctors, general practitioners, making much more than I made. But I couldn't sell my integrity. I mean, money is not that important. The money is only important to me when I don't have it. Go ahead.
So, therefore, okay, now being in the community.